but went to now, So that's how you know. So how's the weather where you are?
It is a little bit overcast and rainy, but
Okay.
otherwise it's a nice spring. It's nice and springy in DC.
Oh, nice. Well, Chicago, it's starting to warm up a little bit, so I'm excited to start doing more stuff outside.
Nice.
Yes. Okay. So I want to thank everyone for joining us on this episode for ServiceLoop. This one is focused on making the move and when to pivot in your career. Our guest today, Samantha, thank you so much for joining us. If you could give us your background and kind of roles you've held and where you're at now.
Sure. My name is Samantha Broaddus. Thank you so much for having me today. I am from California originally. I lived in Ohio for a little while, and then I came to Washington, D.C. For college, and I never left. So I've been in D.C. for more than 20 years, which is crazy to say.
Mhm.
I've been a field service engineer, a field service manager. I held a role called the technical escalation manager, and now I run a global field service organization.
Wow, that's a lot. Thank you for sharing. So, your role right now, I know you've transitioned a lot. Tell me about the beginning of your story and how you got to where you are now.
Sure. So, like I said, I came to school in Washington, D.C., and that was because I wanted to be a lawyer. And so, being in D.C. For a law career sounded like a really good idea. So, I came to Catholic University here in Washington, D.C., as a political science, political theory major. And about halfway through school, I realized that I don't think law was meant for me. So
Yeah.
I I actually had a funny encounter where somebody in my dorm, a friend of mine, asked if anyone could help him with calculus homework. And I hadn't done calculus in 2 years, but I said, yeah, I like calculus, I'll help you. And I was helping him, and I said, oh my goodness, I miss math. I really do.
Yeah.
I don't really like this gray area that I feel like I'm in all the time in my political theory classes and having these political debates where there's no right or wrong answer. It's just who can argue better. And I wasn't feeling good about that. I really missed objective truth, objective right and wrong. And as I'm helping him with his math homework, I'm like, this is it. This is what I missed. I missed a right answer.
Yeah.
And so it was actually pretty neat. I was on the phone with my dad the next day, and I said, yeah, if I could do college all over again, I think I'd be an engineer, because that's what that guy was. He was an engineer, and I liked what he was doing. And my dad just said, Sam, you are a sophomore in college. Go be an engineer. And,
Right.
and I took a step back. I said, you're absolutely right. And the
Yeah.
next day I walked into the engineering school and became an engineer. The rest is history.
That's awesome. So there's two pivots there, right? So what initially drew you to wanting to be a lawyer? And then what was that aha moment when you were like, okay, I need to do biomedical engineering? Because those are completely different fields, right? So what was that aha moment for you?
Yeah, from a pretty young age, I was very opinionated. I spoke my mind freely. I was good at arguing and articulating a viewpoint. And everyone
Mhm.
around me had always said, oh, you're going to make a great lawyer. I remember my pediatrician saying it to me at a pediatrician appointment. Oh, you're going to be a great lawyer.
Yeah.
And I think with the prestige of the law profession as it being a well-paying job, I think it was almost a foregone conclusion. It was just, this is what I'm good at. This is what everybody says I'm going to be successful in, and I'm going to go do it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that was, so I think it felt from a very young age like that's what I had heard I was going to be good at. And then it ended up being what I wanted. And then
Right.
once I got into the nitty gritty of what it was going to be like, it didn't feel right. It really made me feel uneasy, not having that objective truth, not having that like clarity on this is right, this is not, and so that was the big moment for me when I started to feel that unease that this isn't right, and I
Yeah.
don't want to go too far down this road. But it just it was
Yeah.
very clear to me pretty early on, once I was in the environment, that it wasn't a fulfilling place for me to be.
I think that's so key. A lot of people stay in environments or careers that don't really suit them or aren't fulfilling. So to lead with that emotion, right? That feeling of like, is this day to day something that I want to do, or is it not something I want to do? And were there steps that you took to prepare for each pivot? Like, what was that transition like?
Yeah, I think there were a couple key moments in each of the pivots that I've made in my career. Um, Switching companies, switching degrees, um,
Mhm.
and it always started with that feeling that something is wrong, something inside that says something's wrong. And then in every case, I just wanted to pause a moment to make sure that that was true. But yes, in every case, I had a critical conversation with someone that I would classify as a trusted advisor. So in this first example I just gave, it was my father, right?
Right.
And so that having that objective third party to check me or to make sure that like my understanding was aligned with an objective party's understanding was really critical in that. And then the third was the opportunity opening. And so
Mhm.
I opened the opportunity in the case of, adding on another degree. But in other cases where job openings had to actually be there, the opportunity had to open in some fashion. So I think those were the critical steps that allowed for the pivot to happen.
Right. That I think I love that you got that confirmation. So it's something that you felt, but then you went to somebody trusted, like you said, confirmed that this is probably the best, situation or move forward for you. Would you say that these opportunities, you said you kind of sought them out? How did you do that? It probably wasn't luck, right? So these new opportunities, how did you find them? Was it talking through networking with other people? How did they kind of come to you?
Yeah, I think that it was each situation was slightly different. I am a pretty forward, direct person, so I go looking for things. In this case, I marched right into the biomedical engineering department, and actually another um, pivot, I guess you could call it, that I made is right after school. I was burnt out. I was completely burnt out from the because I did finish both degrees, so I had dual degreed, taken the course load of two students. And when I graduated, I said, I am done. I need a
I need a
mental
break.
break.
Yeah.
And so I said, I'm going to go have a fun year and find some jobs that suit a fun year. And so I was working out a ton. I'd been a three-sport varsity athlete and I still wanted to work out a lot. And so
Yeah.
I was at a gym and I saw a personal trainer and I said, that's what I want to do
Yes,
next.
you're like, that's it.
So I became a personal trainer, got certified, and started taking on clients. And then similarly, I thought it'd be fun to work at a bar. So I took a 2 week
Wow.
bartending class and then walked into my local bar like, hey, I have this great bartending certification. They basically laughed at me and said, do you know how to pour a beer? And I said, yes. And they said, then you're hired. So I think I was pretty direct in some of those opportunities, in looking for them and asking for them. And then in others, especially in my more professional career, the job opening had to be there. And so some of
Yeah.
that was networking.
Okay.
One of them was a little bit lucked into because I had tried to network for a job and I accidentally applied for the wrong job. And then the job I did apply for ended up being a great fit. And so that was kind of
Wow.
a lucky thing that
Yeah.
fell into my lap.
Mhm.
And then in my most recent career move, it had been referred to me by someone I had previously worked with. He said,
Okay.
hey, my boss's position is open and I'd love, if you wanted to work over here. And it was a great next step in my career. And so that one, I wasn't even actively looking, but the fit was so perfect that I went for it.
I think that's amazing. One, the confidence that you have going into these, right? So I think a lot of times people lack that confidence to see these opportunities. And a lot of times, if you don't see subconsciously like there's opportunities for you, you won't see them when they're right in front of you. And so, how do you feel you've built that confidence to just go out and do these things and be so straightforward? Because I think some people that might be not be the case for them.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and one that I'm not sure I can answer well for everyone. I think I am a fairly confident person,
Mhm.
and that's easy for me. And I think that sometimes these more I don't know, things that you have to do a little bit on faith, or on the ability that, or on your own ability, like I can do this. But really
Mhm.
believing that you can do whatever you set out to do,
Yeah.
is not as natural to some people. And so, to those people, practice in little ways, like find something that scares you a little bit and try anyway. And I've heard conversations, from people who don't feel as confident, and it is little things like that.
Yeah.
Like I was talking to my husband the other day, and we volunteer with my daughter's school, and volunteering used to be something that scared him a little bit, and now that we had to do it, we had to put in so many hours this year.
Mhm.
We just finished, our volunteer hours, and he said, volunteering doesn't scare me anymore. Now I get it. Like everybody's just kind of figuring it out as they go along and
Yeah.
helping where you need to help. And like, it's not scary to me anymore. And I think practicing some of those, things make these bigger decisions, these bigger pivots, easier in time.
Absolutely. I agree. I think that it's those little shifts and, trying to find that bridge between like change and making sure, like, if you're trying to make those changes, that it's not something so abrupt that you scare yourself out of it. But those little shifts, then it's kind of like, oh, this is easy. Oh, I understand why I did this. So that makes sense. Thank you for sharing that. What would you say? As far as mindset, we kind of went into the confidence piece of it. Would you say that that helps you be more adaptable to change? Are there practices that you do to help you with that?
Yeah, mindset is actually a really important part of this.
Mhm.
For me, I've always been one of the people that work to live and not live to
Yeah.
work. And I had an interesting conversation this past weekend with someone who actually is a lawyer. And she said that when she made the change from being a practicing attorney, like in a courtroom, to working at a law school, and not having that active, caseload, there was
Mhm.
a little bit of imposter syndrome. There was a little bit of feeling lost and like I messed up in making this career move. And when I talked it through with her a little bit, it was because her identity was so
Yeah.
tied to being that lawyer. And
Right.
I think that making sure that you're in a frame of mind that you know who you are, separate and apart from the work that you do, is really critical in feeling free enough to make these pivots. If you don't, if you can't identify who you are as a person and what your value is separate from the work that you
Yes.
do, it's
Mhm.
very difficult to change because that is so tied to your value and how you see yourself. And until you can dissociate the two, it's going to be difficult to make a change.
Wow, that really hits because I think a lot of people, like you said, there has to be some self-discovery of yourself. Without that title, without that career, if you're wanting to make a change and where you're at and where you're existing is just not aligning, right? And if
Right.
you're too tied to that identity, yes, you have that imposter syndrome. It's going to make it even 10 times harder to shift. So, my last question for you, Samantha, what advice would you give to someone who feels stuck, burnt out, or even scared to make that career change?
Well, first, I would just say you can do it. Like it is, you can do it. And I don't know if what your particular situation is or why you feel stuck. If you have a lot of external dependencies, you're the sole breadwinner in your family. Like there's a lot of things that hold people back from taking the leap into a change. And like you have to discern your own situation, and making a change for a change's sake, or making a change at not the right time for your family or for you, is might not be the right thing to do. And so you really have to go through that discernment process and really understand, like, what is it going to take to get there? What are the risks associated with this move? Am I willing to take on that risk? What is the worst case scenario that could happen? And really kind of look through all of that and discern whether or not it is the right time to make the move. And there is no right or wrong answer. Just because
Right.
you know that you need to make a change, if the right opportunity isn't available yet, then maybe it's not the time to make the change.
Yes.
And so you have to really weigh all of the factors, get some outside input as well. Like, find those trusted advisors, whether that be a spouse, a significant other, a parent, or just a best friend who knows you really well. Make sure that you have some outside opinions, because when you're in the moment, a lot of times the decision feels really big.
Yeah.
And it's easier for a third party who's not feeling all of the pressures and feeling all of the risks, to help you, guide you through that decision making process. So that's what I would recommend to anyone who's thinking about making a career change or thinking about making even just a job change. Make sure that you've really thought it through. If you're a spiritual or a prayerful person, pray on it. If you need to talk to a friend or a trusted advisor, definitely do that before you make that move.
Samantha, this has been great. I'm sure I feel inspired, and I've already made that transition, but it's inspiring me to do more. So I'm sure other people are definitely going to take some nuggets from this. Thank you so much for being on Service Loop with us. And thank you, everybody, for joining.
My pleasure. Thank you.